So this burning question, how does the signal propagate to the entire muscle fiber? Okay, that probably wasn't a burning question in your mind. I'll tell you why it's a burning question. The signal that I'm talking about is the signal that it's time to contract. Propagate means simply move. You'll hear this a lot more in physiology when you get into nervous system and muscular system. Moving, signal is electrical. Moving, how does the electrical signal move? Okay. And I'm going to just briefly figure out where I'm at. Briefly go back here and just point out to you that movement is important of this signal because here's our neuron, and it's doing the neurons in all blue, so I'll just stay with that theme. And it drops the signal right there on that pinprick, that spot. Oh, here you can see a nice microscopic picture. That is the synaptic bulb. That's just one little portion of your skeletal muscle cell, one little pinprick right there. The entire skeletal muscle cell is like this plus more, actually, because they've cut it off. Probably go a long way in each direction. So what you need to be able to do is take the electrical signal that's here in the blue, and it actually needs to go both ways down the entire muscle cell or muscle fiber in order for it to contract. Okay, so that is our burning question. How does the signal, the electrical signal, so think electric, because the muscle fibers are electric, similar to neurons. How does that electrical signal move down the entire length of the muscle fiber? So we need to introduce some new structures in order to do that. So this area here, this beige area, is the sarcolemma, which hopefully you're thinking plasma membrane, the outer cell membrane of your muscle fiber. Well, actually, just by nature of the sarcolemma, and I'm not going to go into details, you'll learn perhaps more in phys, the signal has no problem traveling across the sarcolemma. It's very conductive, so the signal just literally, zips along. Let's say that this was the neuromuscular junction here. The signal will zip along over this entire plane, really, this membrane. And here and there, you see these holes right there. See those holes? Those holes, and here's one towards close to the edge here, and it's cut away so you can see it. Those holes lead to what we call T-tubules, labeled here. These T-tubules are like wires that come from the sarcolemma. They're literally like infoldings of the sarcolemma that wrap around. Ooh, what is this right there? You see that long cylinder? It's one of our strings or threads. Hopefully you remember, what's the next smallest thing after a muscle fiber? It's an organelle called a myofibril. So these T-tubules will wrap around each myofibril. I'm actually going to go back just a little bit, just to remind you. See those? Those are all of our myofibrils here in the inside of the muscle fiber. Well, the myofibrils that are sitting right next to the sarcolemma, they're going to get the signal, the electrical signal. That's great. But we need it to get it to the center too. We need to get it to the inside myofibrils, as well as the ones sitting on the edge next to the sarcolemma. So that's what the T-tubules do. And I know they're only showing you one here. They're only showing you a single T-tubule wrapping around a single myofibril. You just have to trust me that they branch off. If we had another myofibril down here and go blue with our electrical signal, it would just keep traveling down. There'd be another set of T-tubules and so on to get all the way to the inside of the muscle fiber. Okay, then you have this weird yellow stuff. So I'll go with red. So on either side of the T-tubule, you can see this darker, these tubes, and you can see these tubes are connected to this net-like structure here. So here's another tube, and that is a messy net-like structure. That entire structure, the tubes at the end and this thinner tubes that look like a net, that whole thing is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which may sound familiar to you from 1610 when you learn parts of a cell. There is a thing called an endoplasmic reticulum, and muscle cells get special names, so we call it instead the sarcoplasmic instead of endoplasmic reticulum. And this thing is very important. The sarcoplasmic reticulum, it stores calcium. There's lots of calcium in there. And it will release that calcium. It'll release it and let it float around next to the myofibril. And, well, not next to it, goes into it, and it will trigger muscle contraction. It will trigger that sliding filament mechanism. So calcium is very important. But you don't want it to be present all the time. Otherwise, you'd have, well, spastic paralysis. Basically, well, your muscle would be in a constantly contracted state, which is not what you want. So it will suck the calcium back in between contractions and then dump it into the myofibril when you want it to contract. Okay, so that's ultimately what we want to do. So the electrical signal travels down the sarcolemma, down into the T-tubules. And then the sarcoplasmic reticulum has these ends that are, these big tubes that are on either side of the T-tubule. Those portions of the sarcoplasmic reticulum are called the terminal cisternae. They sit next to the T-tubule. So terminal cisternae is part of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum includes these little net-like structures here and this enlarged area next to the T-tubule. And so the way that you see these arranged, got a lot of drawing there, the way that you see these arranged around a myofibril is you'll have a single T-tubule in the center, and you'll have two terminal cisternae, one on each side. So that makes what we call a triad. So a triad includes one T-tubule and two terminal cisternae, lots of T's, triad, T-tubule, terminal cisternae. And remember, terminal cisternae is connected to, or is part of, I should say, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So this electrical signal that I mentioned, it literally just is, they're highly conductive. It just jumps from the T-tubule to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then you release calcium, and the muscle contracts. That's basically the story. You probably want to go back and watch the video. I'm going to go ahead and show you the list of steps that I wrote out on the slide. You may have already looked at. Electrical impulse is what we're referring to. So impulse refers to this signal. The electrical impulse will travel along the sarcolemma. Then it travels into the T-tubules, which are infoldings of the sarcolemma. So infolded inward, that's like plasma membrane. And it carries that electrical impulse into the interior of the fiber. Not just this one, but all the other myofibrils deep into the fiber. Then the impulse is passed to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So it's passed over from the T-tubule to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which has that terminal cisternae. That's where it first goes. And the sarcoplasmic reticulum will store calcium. And then I didn't put that in writing there. It will not store it. It will release it. Oh my God. It will release calcium when it receives that electrical signal. And then this structure, this triad here, refers to a T-tubule in the center and a terminal cisternae on either side. The only thing I really want you to know about calcium, besides where it's stored and when it's released when it gets the electrical signal, and then it's stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The video gave a pretty excruciating detail of what exactly calcium does to the regulatory proteins of the thin filaments, and et cetera, et cetera. All I want you to know is if calcium is present, the sliding filament mechanism is triggered. Mechanism is then triggered in the presence of calcium. So that's how you go from nervous system, sending the message to move, to the actual muscle contraction. This is a long route, I know. Oh, I'm going to show you this one last thing. Long video. This is your book's version of it. It's better than the last edition, but I'm still not thrilled. Okay, see this white, like clear area right here? That whitish, opaque somewhat. That is supposed to be the sarcolemma. Great. So we already talked about the sarcolemma on the, I've misspelled it, my bad. The sarco L, I'm going to be lazy. And it's being peeled away. These green structures in here, the wires, and actually they'll go all the way in deep. Those are the T-tubules in green. And I know if you're colorblind, you don't necessarily know what that means. But if you look down here, they've zoomed into one myofibril. So the T-tubule would be the little center tube here in each of those triads. So why I don't like this image is because the sarcolemma is supposed to be, or the T-tubules are supposed to be infoldings of the sarcolemma, and that is not made clear here. You can kind of see the holes here, but the fact they colored them green, I don't know, I kind of would have just gone with green everywhere. Why not? Why not have a green, slightly transparent sarcolemma? I mean, none of these colors really exist at this level anyway. Okay, so there's the green T-tubules, and then in this dark indigo color, I don't know, whatever, the purplish color, you can see the terminal cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Actually, you can see it even better here on either side of the T-tubule. So those are the terminal cisternae, which are part of the whole net here, the sarcoplasmic reticulum that stores calcium until it gets the signal, and then it releases the calcium to cause muscle contraction. Here is yet one more example of this. This is from your book. It is ever so slightly better, but I'm not 100% thrilled. It does actually show you everything from, okay, we've got a synaptic vesicle there. So the electrical impulse is traveled down the axon, and when it does, this triggers these synaptic vesicles to, there you see them, they'll go to the edge and dump acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft. That acetylcholine is going to land on an acetylcholine receptor, those proteins on the sarcolemma, and that sends the signal to the muscle that it's time to contract. But then that signal has to reach the entire muscle cell. So the signal actually travels nicely along the sarcolemma. It's very electrically conductive. So it just zips along, and it'll keep zipping along the entire sarcolemma. And then at these infoldings here and here, the T-tubules, the infoldings of the sarcolemma, the electrical signal will zip down deep into the muscle fiber all the way. And you see another myofibril here. There will be a bunch more down here. The T-tubules wrap around all of them. And then the electrical signal will jump here and here to the terminal cisternae that are on terminal cisternae on either side of the T-tubules. And terminal cisternae are part of this net, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that releases, oh, these little dots are supposed to be calcium. And then this all happens down here. By that I mean, then the thick filaments are going to grab the thin filaments and they're going to pull this way, pull, and your muscle is going to go from relaxed state to contracted. Basically, your elbow is going to bend there. Okay. That is the complicated anatomy of sending a signal from a neuron to a muscle cell and telling it to contract.